Thank you. Thank you so much for your introduction, Mr. Taniguchi. And thank you all for joining us for this webinar. I very much appreciate having this opportunity to address your concerns, curiosity, and questions about my country's system of criminal justice. As was just introduced by Mr. Taniguchi, I am an attorney myself, and I was previously admitted to the Japan Federation of Bar Associations. During that time, I spent a spell at New York University School of Law. Amazing! That it was already 21 years ago when I worked under the guidance of Professor Frank Apham, apart from my husband for the period, but together with my baby girl, who was only 10 months old. Nothing is more rewarding for me than Professor Apham being with us today. Thank you, Professor. I am so pleased that you made it. Also, I'm happy to see two of my friends with me. They are Chiyo Kobayashi, as founder of Washington Core, and Shigeko Borg, whose daughter Sky was chosen as Distinguished Young Woman of America 2017. Thank you both, Chiyo and Shigeko, for joining us today. My thanks are also, of course, due to Ambassador Sugiyama and Mr. Hara, Chairman of Alliance Forum Foundation, who both have worked hard for me to make this event happen. Now, as Minister of Justice, I will very soon step down, along with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. I feel doubly honored to close my chapter as a member of his cabinet by speaking right here on this very topic with you all today. When I was a teenager, my father fell upon an enormous financial difficulty. He was a guarantor of his friend's loan, and my father ended up shouldering an unbearable amount of debt. Our family was harassed by the debt collector relentlessly. Then, almost out of nowhere, an attorney came to our family and worked out my father's financial obligations free of charge, pulling us all out of the muddy morass. That was the moment when I pledged to myself that one day I too would become a lawyer, and long story short, here I am. My background being such, it has enabled me to look at the country's legal practices rather more objectively than otherwise, from both sides, one from the angle of defending attorney and the other from a prosecutor's perspective, because currently within my ministry are the country's prosecutors whose number well exceeds 2,000. Now, it is a latter what I see as someone supervising the country's prosecutors that I will spend the next 10 minutes discussing. To start with, Japan and the US know very little about each other when it comes to our criminal justice systems. Comparative criminal justice is a discipline very few law schools offer within the United States or without. One of the top law schools of the United States, as I saw its course catalog, offers only one course related to Japan, and that is comparative constitutional law, not comparative criminal justice. As our culture differ from each other, one finds it hard to compare even apples and apples with any accuracy. Even more gets lost in translation in comparing one country's criminal justice system with another's. For instance, last year in 2019, in Tokyo, which is among the world's largest cities with a population of 14 million, there was only one single homicide by gunfire. A city of 14 million people. Imagine that. In 2018, throughout the country, per 10 million population, the number of people who lost their lives in the course of law enforcement amounted to 0.2. Whereas in the US, according to one estimate, the figure was 167 times as large, at 33.5. This is little to no point. There is little to no point. It is safe to say now, in comparing what you see in one country's criminal justice system with what you find in another nation. What is important is, as we both strive to maintain open democracy, we make absolutely no compromise. To repeat, absolutely no compromise on basic human rights and freedoms, nor on some of the principles that make our systems of criminal justice accountable, fair, and open, such as the presumption of innocence. One common claim holds that in Japan, the conviction rate is high as a stunning 99%. Nothing, may I say, could be further from the truth. Here follow the facts. The record from 2018 shows that the nation's police sent a total of roughly 1 million people to prosecutors for alleged criminal offenses. Setting aside juveniles, the number drops to some 927,000, which is the number of people about whom prosecutors had to determine whether or not to indict. How many would you guess ended up indicted in the same year? The answer is 308,000, which is only 1/3 of the number I just mentioned, that is 927,000. Now, 308,000 having been indicted in 2018, the actual number of those sent to prison in the same year was a mere 862. That's only 2%. Welcome to Japan's harsh penal system. Let me repeat. Out of the total number of those sent to the country's prosecutors, only 2% of them spent time behind bars. This is because Japanese prosecutors indict only a strictly limited number of cases, which of course applies to white-collar crimes. They do so only when they believe, based on the sufficient evidence, that they can prove guilty beyond reasonable doubt. I understand that in the U.S., for every 100,000 population, you have a total of 10.1 federal and state-level prosecutors. Japan's corresponding number, believe me, stands at only 2.2. This quite small number of prosecutors, I must say, as Minister of Justice, are doing their jobs in commendable way when it comes to choosing who to prosecute and who not to indict. Let me elaborate just a little bit more on my country's criminal justice system before inviting questions. Firstly, the Japan system gives relatively more protection to suspects because, unlike in some other democracies, in Japan, it is mandatory that a bench arrest warrant be issued before an arrest, with the exception, of course, of catching the criminal red-handed in flagrante delicto. Secondly, and needless to say, at the very beginning of the investigation, suspects are informed of their inherent right to remain silent, which is important to avoid excessive questionings that could result in forced confessions. This is guaranteed to the fullest throughout the process, which is no different from what you have in the United States. Suspects also have the right to consult with lawyers in confidence, and audio and visual recording of questionings are to be taken. It should go without saying that the Japanese Constitution stipulates that forced confessions shall not be admitted as evidence. It also prohibits convictions based solely on confessions. Thirdly, unless the court finds otherwise, a defendant can be granted bail and get released before the trial begins. The exception is when there is a chance that the crucial pieces of evidence might be concealed or destroyed. While on bail, defendants are free to act as they wish, of course within the bail conditions such as meeting their family members. And rest assured, we are hiring more and even more translators so that equal footing is given to all suspects regardless of their native languages. which bring me back to what I dealt with many years ago when I was an attorney. It was a case involving a defendant from the Middle East, and it makes me feel proud even today that for him I won a verdict on not guilty. Not guilty. It sometimes occurs to me that democracy is a curious animal, shall we say, for it takes generations, not merely decades, for it to mature. The record tells us the Japanese criminal justice system dates back many a century, and conventional wisdom among historians holds that unbalance the system of the Edo era was one that was relatively fair and indeed accountable, with court cases amassing year after year. Still, the most important thing is that we must all stay open to advice, suggestions, and critiques. To that very end, I am pleased to be telling you that I put together experts, academics, practitioners of law, and also from the private sector. July this year, I formed what is called Council for the Renewal of Justice and Prosecution Administration to discuss criminal justice, among others. Innovation and improvement must go on. Finally, also, along with the same context, may I make an announcement that come March 2021, we are hosting in Kyoto the 14th United Nations Congress on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. Back in 1970, Japan proudly hosted the same UN Congress as the first ever non-Western country doing so, also in Kyoto. I have very thrilled at the thought that exactly half a century since, the ancient city will once again be a venue for those of you tackling challenges that require collective wisdom and actions, such as cybercrime, corruption, tax havens, etc. And let me tell you, then you will hear more about Japan's criminal justice system. So stay tuned. Kyoto will welcome you all. Thank you very much.